It is good that we are here. For those of you whom I don't know, my name is Father Rolling, priest of the Diocese of Lincoln. I'm one of the priests that works out at the seminary in Seward, trying to keep the seminarians in line. I think they keep us in line more sometimes than we do, but we're giving it our best shot. So it's good to be in a place of prayer. Obviously, things are a little bit different than we might have otherwise imagined, maybe than our experiences in the past have been with respect to retreats out here. But nonetheless, it is good to be in this place of quiet, to draw away from the world for a time, and to hopefully reflect upon the ways in which Christ can more deeply call us to enter into that life of discipleship. And hopefully the Holy Spirit will, through my words, speak something into your heart to allow you to move just a little bit further forward down the line in growing in your path of holiness and in that relationship with Jesus Christ. And if there are moments where you feel moved by the Spirit to do other things, I will not be offended. I know that I am not always a perfect instrument of the Holy Spirit. And so this is how this works. But nonetheless, we will do what the Holy Spirit provides and what the ways in which we can cooperate. One kind of practical note, those of you who are parishioners in parishes in the Diocese of Lincoln, if you have not already heard, it was announced on Thursday that Bishop Conley returned to service as Bishop of the Diocese of Lincoln. So there's a letter that is to be read in all the parishes in the Diocese of Lincoln on Sunday morning. That letter is actually out on the white table out in the vestibule. So rather than kind of take up some of the time that we have together for prayer and reflection, I thought I would just leave it out there for you to read it. It's good, kind of gives a little bit of Bishop Conley's heart. Today was his first day back in the office, so to speak. We had a meeting with him at 10 o'clock this morning, we priests, and it's good to have him back. So today the church celebrates the memorial of St. Francis Xavier Cabrini. Maybe you know something about her. Obviously, she's the first American citizen to be canonized as a saint, but she wasn't born in the United States. She was born in northern Italy, somewhere south of Milan. The geography is not that important. But even as a young girl, she had this missionary desire to go into the world and particularly to go to China. She always felt this call to bring the gospel of Christ to the land of China, because she's born in the mid 1800s, obviously the time when the Christian faith is not welcomed in that land. And so she joins the religious order of the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart. And even as she continues in that life, in that missionary order, she has this desire still to be a missionary. And the fact that she took upon herself the name, I forget what her baptismal name is, but it's not Francis Xavier. That's her religious name. She takes on the name of Francis Xavier as her religious name. And she's inspired by Saint Francis Xavier, the great 16th century Jesuit missionary, who himself desired to go to China to bring the gospel of Christ to them. And so she embraces his patronage. She takes upon herself something of his spirit, something of his vision, something of his burning desire to bring Christ to that particular country. So as she carries this desire in her heart while living in Italy, up in the north of Italy, with her community, her work and her desire and her longing to go to China is noticed by her bishop. And her bishop, for whatever reason, happens to be in Rome and happens to be speaking to the Pope, who at the time is Leo XIII. Leo XIII hears of her missionary zeal and her missionary desire, and she gets an audience with Leo XIII. And so she expresses her heart to him and says, "Your Holiness, I want to go to China. I want to be a missionary there, and please do what you can to send me there." And he says to her famously, "Not to the east, to the west." He was sending her to the United States. Because at that time, in the late 1800s, there was large numbers of Italians who were immigrating to the United States in hope of a better life, as were many from Europe at the time. But as they were going to the United States, obviously they don't know English. And so they're going and they're finding themselves in difficult situations, physically, spiritually, need of assistance. And so he sends her there, and he sends her with some of her sisters there. She eventually makes her way into Chicago. She had different points, was in Denver and on the West Coast. There's also, her presence was also, she was also in Central America and South America, and she traveled apparently quite intensely during her life, then dying at 1917 in Chicago itself. But here we see her living out something of the missionary zeal of another saint, Francis Xavier, the Jesuit priest, seeking to imitate his holiness and trying to make his holiness her own, right? Or trying to imitate his holiness so that she too could grow in holiness. She's obviously not a saint at the time that she is embracing his patronage, embracing his spirit, and desiring to be a missionary in foreign lands. But nonetheless, she's seeking to imitate his holiness. Benedict XVI, in his document on hope, Spe Salvi, he says, human life is a journey. Towards what destination? How do we find the way? Life is like a voyage on the sea of history, often dark and stormy, a voyage in which we watch for the stars that indicate the route. The true stars of our life are the people who have lived good lives. They are lights of hope. Certainly, Jesus Christ is the true light, the sun that has risen above all the shadows of history. But to reach him, we also need lights close by, people who shine with his light, and so guide us along the way. Lights that give us hope. This is what St. Francis Xavier was to Francis Xavier Cabrini. This light, this hope that she, like him, could grow in that holiness, could follow in his footsteps in some way, could be a missionary like him, could serve Jesus Christ, could follow God's will for her life, and be a saint like him. And so we too are called to find those lights and to follow those lights, because we too are called to be saints. Now it sounds intimidating. I'm like, whoa, no, not me, Father, not me. No. Yes, you. St. Francis de Sales, in his Introduction to the Devout Life, which, by the way, just as a side note, is a really great book to read. If you haven't read it already, I would strongly encourage it. I also, on the back, and right as you walk in, there's a little table, and there's some handouts. During the course of the talks this weekend, I have a few longer quotes, and I thought it's just easier if I just gave you a copy of them rather than having to worry about you, trying to remember them or whatever. So if you would like, they're in the back there, and you can pick them up, and there's quotes for a number of the talks this weekend. But Francis, I copied one of the passages from Francis de Sales' Introduction to the Devout Life, in which at the beginning he says, speaking of the devout life of one who is called to deeper holiness, he says, devotion is simply a spiritual activity and liveliness by means of which divine love works in us and causes us to work briskly and lovingly. And just as charity leads us to a general practice of all God's commandments, so devotion leads us to practice them readily and diligently. A lively living of the love of God, to work briskly and lovingly in charity. This is what it means to live a life of devotion. This is what it means to live a life of serious Christian faith, striving for holiness, striving for sainthood. In some ways, it isn't as complicated perhaps as we might fear it is. He says, in order to be good, a man must be filled with love, and to be devout, he must further be very ready and apt to perform the deeds of love. To be ready and apt to perform those deeds of love. Like a sound man, he not only gets along, but he runs and he leaps in the ways of God's commands, says St. Francis de Sales. And he hastens gladly along the paths of heavenly counsels and inspirations. He is eager, energetic, and diligent, not merely in obeying God's commands, but in fulfilling his divine counsels and inspirations as well. It is to have an eagerness and a joy and a zeal and a desire to love God. To love God. It's that simple, says St. Francis de Sales. Now you'll object, you'll say, well, yeah, Father, I know, but, well, they're all religious sisters and religious brothers. They're priests and they're bishops and they're popes. Yes, I know. Listen further to Francis de Sales. He says, Aristotle says that the bee sucks honey from flowers without damaging them, leaving them as whole and fresh as it had found them. But true devotion does still better. For it not only hinders no manner of vocation or duty, but contrariwise, it adorns and beautifies all. Throw precious stones into honey, and each will grow more brilliant according to its several colors. And in like manner, everyone fulfills his special calling better when subject to the influence of devotion. Family duties are lighter, married love is truer, service to our King more faithful, every kind of occupation more acceptable and better performed, where that is the guide. It is an error, nay, more a very heresy, to seek to banish the devout life from the soldier's guard room, from the mechanic's workshop, from the prince's court, or from the domestic hearth. It's fitting for all of us. It's fitting for everyone, everywhere, at every time, to live a life of devotion, to be eager and zealous on the journey to seeking to love God above all things.
He says the Old Testament is filled with examples in Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, Job, Tobias, Sarah, Rebecca, and Judith. In the New Testament, we have St. Joseph, Lydia, and Crispus, who led a perfectly devout life in their trades. We have St. Anne, Martha, St. Monica, Aquila, and Priscilla as examples of household devotion. Cornelius,
St. Sebastian and St. Maurice among soldiers, Constantine, Helena, Luis, Blessed Amadeus, and St. Edward on the throne. And these are just a few of the names that he lists. Notice, he's naming individuals from every walk of life. They lived in so many different ways, in so many different vocations, single, married, priests, religious, all seeking to love God with a zeal and an eagerness and joy. Whether it be great kings and queens or simple laborers. This is the project. This is the invitation. So this weekend, what I hope to do in various ways is simply to look at what this means. To grow in devotion, to grow in the love of God, to have this zeal and this eagerness and this readiness to bound along the paths of God's love. To look at the tools that God gives to us for the sake of this project. To look at the obstacles and the challenges. To look at the graces and gifts. And hopefully everything in between.